Welcome to episode 193 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I chat Formula One, sponsorship, and digital with Zarah Al-Kudcy.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, who is much younger on the internet, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and yes, I am lucky enough to be younger on the internet. You can always get in touch with me via social media at Sean Callanan on most platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, or Facebook at Sean Callanan Speaks if you want to connect with me there. As always, you can always contact me the old-fashioned way via email. I'm not going to give out a fax number these days. Sean at sportsgeekhq.com will get me. And if you ever want to chat, I'm always happy to help and talk to podcast listeners to see how we can help you. You can just go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. This chat with Zarah Al-Kudcy, I caught up with Zarah just after the Monday after the Australian Grand Prix, the first round of Formula One for 2018. She was out here in her role in commercial partnerships for Formula One, checking out what the Australian Grand Prix team were doing and obviously connecting with partners and sponsors and seeing what they were doing, activating. So I thought it was a good time. I've known Zarah for a long time, and we'll go into her backstory in the interview, in a few times that she has been in Australia previously, and just get some insights into her role from a commercial partnerships point of view and sort of how she ended up in that role and some of the changes that Formula One has seen, especially on the social and the digital side, and how it's evolved, I guess, probably in the last 18 months to 2 years. So here is my chat with Zarah Al-Kudcy from Formula One. Very happy to be joined by the jet-setting Zarah Al-Kudcy from Formula One, works in commercial partnerships. Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, this is the day after the night before. Very successful Melbourne Grand Prix, Australian Grand Prix.
And Melbourne even managed to play ball with the weather.
Well, you get 4 days, so you get all 4 seasons.
Yeah, I have my umbrella
Melbourne.
and my sun cream.
Yeah. Yep. So, yes, we're here in the middle in Melbourne. It's a beautiful Monday morning after the first F1 race, the Australian Grand Prix, won by Sebastian Vettel. Another successful major event here in Melbourne, and wanted to talk to you. Wanted to catch up with you. Previously been here in Melbourne in previous roles. Before we get into the F1 stuff and how the Grand Prix went, I want to get a bit more of your background. How did you get into sports, and how did you end up getting into F1?
Well, actually, funny enough, Melbourne sort of is a common theme on my whole career because I came over for the 2006 Commonwealth Games as a budding journalist, and that then led to about 5 years later. I moved back, went work for an agency who I didn't realise I was sat next to in the MPC just over the road.
Yep.
And he put a good word in, ended up at a sports agency doing track and field. But someone else I met at the Commonwealth Games then said, well, I'm leaving Athletics Australia. Do you want to come over? So I came back to Melbourne. And then
so you're in so that's when we first crossed paths.
Yes.
So like
2011, 12.
Yeah, 2000. You're at Athletics Australia, and so what were you doing there?
So comms and marketing.
Yep.
So I think I was probably the only Brit that left London.
Yep.
Even though it was the Diamond Jubilee and London 2012.
Yep.
Came to the other side of the world to then go back to London for the Olympics, and then returned back after the games, and did a bit of Sky Sports. So I went broadcast side. And then Rugby World Cup, so organising committee, which is where sort of the last 3 or 4 years did Rugby World Cup and then the ICC Champions Trophy and Women's World Cup. So kind of quite a sort of 360, very career.
Yep, and so they were in marketing and comms roles, and then...
So I've kind of gone from comms, then back in AA here was comms and marketing, then pure marketing, and then actually I met my now director during the Rugby World Cup. He was at World Rugby, and sort of I've brought it all together now from a sponsorship side. So looking after our sponsors at Formula One.
So you just mentioned there you're at Formula One and you started 6 months ago. And when I do go through your LinkedIn, and the link to Zarah's LinkedIn will be in the show notes, so you can follow up and connect with her. You've jumped from multiple sports. Like I talked to a lot of people that, potentially are lifers or they stay in a particular sport and they gain expertise. What have what advice do you have for people if they want to jump sports, and what have you learned going from athletics to rugby to cricket now to F1? Because, they're not similar at all of those sports.
It's in a way they're like same but different.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons I have done is because I speak English and I speak sport. And it's kind of actually, as you meet other people in different sports, and then you realise that, okay, I can take that or I can learn that. And, athletics is very different because it's an individual sport.
Yep.
So it's multiple different disciplines, but a lot of individuals. And then working with a load of individuals and then going to a team sport is quite different. But then you realise actually what you can take from one to the other. So I don't know. I mean, I think I've just been... I've made the most of the opportunities that I've been given, and often you realise that, look, I probably shouldn't admit this in Australia, but I'm not a massive cricket fan. But in a way, sometimes that's a blessing to work in something that you don't absolutely love, because you realise you sort of come from it a bit more objectively. And I brought in a lot of what I learned at rugby into the cricket roles, and now I'm pleased to say I'm much more of a cricket fan.
Well, we really can't be talking cricket. We're recording this just after the Grand Prix, and in the last week, the England team was all out for 58, and in the last 48 hours, the Australians have come out as cheats. So probably the less we talk about cricket.
True. The men's side's letting the game down. The women are having an absolute stormer at the moment.
Oh, this is true. But the less spoken about cricket, the better at the minute. But I think one of the stuff that, like, I like the fact that you've taken pieces from each part, because aths, is very individual, and it's there's all the stories about the athletes. But then when you're going to team sports, especially country based, you start looking at the tribal nature of the fans and the fact that they're following through thick and thin, but they're all there for that big major event. To now going to more, so F1 is almost like club based, because people follow certain teams because of that fanaticism of, Ferrari or Mercedes or whatever. So you've sort of got that full gamut of what sport does offer.
Well, I mean, in a weird way, F1 actually combines the two, because you have, one of the things I've always noticed with an individual sport is how actually everything rests on that individual. So I know it sounds silly, but Sally, for example, when we work with her, only she can produce the results.
Sally Pearson?
Yes.
Yep.
But only she can also promote herself.
Yep.
Whereas in a team, whoever from Liverpool or Hawthorn, you can sort of share the responsibility. Whereas I think if you look at F1, you have fans of drivers and you have fans of teams. And yes, it's a team event to put actually the car together and get it going. But ultimately, it's also the driver.
Yep.
And so in a way, it's kind of, I see parallels of both sides in Formula One, with how the individual nature of the drivers, but then the team nature of, and telling the story of the team. And I think actually credit to the drivers, they do a good job of it themselves as well. And
F1's always been, had that driver focus, and we're seeing other sports, the NBA in particular, like really pushing, the athlete-driven story. People follow the stars, and the drivers definitely are the stars in F1. So it is a bit of that balance to be promoting the stars and the drivers. They are the story, but then there's so many stories behind them that can get told that the fans that are deeper in want to hear. Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're definitely looking to do, because it's all fan-focused at F1, is telling more stories. And I think building more hero profiles. As you say, the NBA do a brilliant job with it. And actually, I find it fascinating because the sort of player trades in the NBA happen so much that you don't have as much of a tribal nature as maybe you do in soccer. And yet, I mean, yes, okay, LeBron got his jersey burnt when he left Cleveland, but all was forgiven when he came back and won a title. Yep. But at the same time, it's less. I find it interesting how a lot of players can switch quite a lot, and I think we're seeing even in the Premier League, you don't have so much of a one-team player anymore. People are moving around. Well, but I think what's happening in the NBA, and I think a little bit in football as well, is that people are following both their team, but then they're also saying, I follow that player. And so that's why they're tuning in. Yeah. And, if you take look at, say, the NBA and the NFL, one of the things, or baseball to a lesser extent, like a lot of people say, I follow the NFL, but I don't get to see their face because they're underneath the helmet all the time. Yeah. where NBA players are always visible. But one thing I think F1 does well, even though the drivers are always under their helmet when they're driving, they're very recognisable. And they're promoted. And then there was inches of articles this week just on Sebastian Vettel's haircut.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. So there is a good job in actually doing those hero pieces. But
you're right to point out the helmet issue as well. I mean, I don't know if you saw the graphics change this weekend, and you'll have seen the driver list on the side. We've now included the faces of the drivers as well, not just the names. And the opening sequence, again, is all about heroing the drivers and building those profiles as well. So, yeah, helmets are a challenge sometimes.
They are. One of the other things I wanted to sort of dive in on, again, taking your background, to go from Rugby World Cup to the Women's World Cup in cricket, working in that major event piece, same working in the Commonwealth Games. There's a lot of people who stay in that or work in that space that understand the nuances of a major event. What did you take from those? Because now you're coming to F1, and every event is a major event, because you've got like here in Melbourne, you've got an organising committee that's putting on a major event, and then the show will move on, go to the next venue, and it'll be another major event. What's the kind of strain in that to put on that many major events?
I think so. Most of the promoters actually put on the Grand Prix itself, and then we work with them, and which is great, because actually every market, the nuances of each country and each city, I think is probably the biggest difference. In the UK, we went through this massive glut of major events, which sort of started with the Olympics.
Yep.
Then you had a Commonwealth Games, a Rugby World Cup. There's Cricket World Cup next year. Obviously, we have Wimbledon returning every year. And you kind of get to know the sports market very well. And equally, the sports fans start to understand, ticket buying processes.
Yep.
How early do I need to be at an event? So this sort of education piece happens itself. When I came to Australia with track and field, again, I noticed the differences between the appetite for or the drive to get people to an athletics event over here, very different to the UK. So I think that's the biggest thing, and that's where we have to work with the promoters to understand, going to the Grand Prix this weekend is going to be so different to Bahrain.
Yep.
And then China.
Yep.
And I think it would be remiss of us just to sort of drop in the same thing 21 times.
Yep.
And equally, a lot of the fans on the ground then don't buy into it. So I think it's about having a core product that we then sort of tailor with each local market. Yeah.
I mean, the core product is the race, and that's why everyone's coming there. And when I caught up with you at the track on Thursday, you were saying that there were a lot of race organisers coming to Melbourne.
So Silverstone that were in Melbourne over the weekend, for example, and they, I caught up with them at the weekend and sort of highlighted a lot of the stuff they just loved, and they just, how different some of it was and the makeup, but again, Albert Park's very different to Silverstone as an actual venue.
Yep.
You've got a big lake in the middle, a lot of green space. So Silverstone hasn't been blessed with the weather, not that they can control that.
Yep.
So again, it's kind of you take the learnings. And Austin, they just tap into that US entertainment piece really well. They put on massive gigs. I think Justin Timberlake was last year and Taylor Swift was the year before. So everyone does think quite different. And you learn and pick and take what you think is going to be best and build it each year. And
so they can come here, look at what Melbourne's doing or look at what Austin's doing and saying, what is our version of that? What do our fans want? But what fits for us? Austin's obviously going to say, we're going to do barbecue well, so there's going to be some great food places there that are doing barbecue well, because that's their personality. Because partly it's a massive tourism play to say, well, this is what our city offers, and you want it sort of to be a...
Yeah, and I think, Heineken, to use a sponsor example, they're very good at doing that as well. So they work with... the Heineken Saturdays here at the Australian Open has been great. It was brilliant when I was here, and they've moved that now to the Formula One, and it's working brilliant as well. I think last year was the first time they did it. And then in Austin last year, they did Topgolf.
Yep.
And in China, they're going to be working, or they're the title partner to our first fan festival. So they're an example of a sponsor that sort of tailors it to each market as well. Big global brand, but they understand that each market's quite different as to how they consume Heineken and their view of it as well.
So you come into the role around 6 months ago, August last year. From outside the world of F1, what were your first impressions, and also the difficulty, if there is, of coming in mid-season? So it's not like you're planning out the year; you're coming in mid-season. What were your first impressions of your first couple of weeks in the job?
I was blown away. I have never seen anything like it. the number of people involved, and I mean this not just from an F1 point of view, but the teams, then the promoters and the sponsors, just the number of people that are involved, the technology that's involved, the fact that it does literally pick up and move on to last year 20 different places. I think even from our broadcast side, because we do the world feed, just seeing the setup in there, I mean, it was like walking into what I would only equate to being Star Trek. Sort of the setup of machinery and the sort of the logistics that goes behind it. And I think that's one big thing that Liberty have come in and want to sort of open up and tell those stories, like with the Netflix series, for example. I think for a long time that's been quite a mystery as to how this stuff gets put on. But it would just blow you away when you just see the amount that's involved without, I think, giving away trade secrets at the same time, because it's important to have, a little bit of not too much
secret
of an open
sauce.
book.
Exactly. So you mentioned there that there has been a change, in F1 and I guess the approach, and so you've come in on the back of those sort of changes starting to come in. You spoke there about the Netflix series that's going to come out, sort of sharing some of those stories. And sometimes, change is always hard. It's like it's never easy. And you're coming in as someone new to the sport, but there'll be a lot of people in that you work with that have been in F1 for a long time. They've always done it that way. How has that adjustment to, hey everyone, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to change our focus a little bit, and digital's a big part of that in the loosening of. I guess the restrictions around what can be published on digital and social and using that. How has that change been accepted and how is it going so far, I guess is probably the question.
It actually weirdly reminds me a lot of Rugby World Cup 2015 in terms of just the vibe, because it feels very much, Sean has this great phrase of it being a sort of 60-plus-year-old startup company. Because you've got this great tradition and base that's been built over years and a history that, you can't buy history.
And there's no reason to throw it out.
No,
like that's the other thing. It's like, here's the new shiny thing. Let's stop doing what's worked.
And I think
for
they're very
many
conscious
years.
of that. But it's just everyone that's come into work has just got such an appetite to open it up and just, build it and have this great entertainment product. And that reminds me a lot of how we were at Rugby World Cup. You have people coming in. I mean, the only difference being that hopefully it will never end because obviously a major event does. So I think that's the first part of the question you asked. But then from a digital point of view, I think you've kind of seen just how that's exploded. So the teams have totally embraced it. I think they do a great job on their own social media platforms. But then, the strategy we've got with terms of having an OTT product coming into the market, I think you'll see the content we put out on our social platforms is very tailored as well. And we're working a lot closer with our partners to do branded content. So it's not just about, badging stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the question I had because, again, what has worked very successfully in F1 and the way sponsors have engaged as, here's our logo. Where is it going to go? On the car or on the driver or on the track, as well as the hospitality event activation piece. And now you're sort of opening the door on the digital piece and as much as there's change on your side internally on how do we present this, how do we sell it, how do we do that, you've also got the sponsors changing their mindset a little bit to say, well, this is what we now can offer because we're offering up these new pieces. How's that? That's in your role. So how's that conversation gone?
It's all been, I think, very exciting so far and welcomed as well. I think so. Exposure is always going to be a big part, whether that's TV or digital. I think the first part is that everyone's trying to work out is how do you measure it these days, because it's not just about linear exposure and it's not just about how long is my graphic on the screen for. It's also about growing the TV audience. So actually more people are seeing you. And so that's the first piece. And then the digital side, it's working on what is great content, because actually we don't just want to put something up that fans aren't going to want. We want people to like, we want people to share. And then it becomes, the big piece is the measuring of it. So we've been doing quite a bit of work actually with Gemba around looking at the IP value of something. Yes, the exposure metric as well. And then the hard costs, so your hospitality. And I think it's about putting together all three elements and sort of building a much stronger way of valuing what you're actually investing in. And
just have that conversation, have the sponsor understand what what they're buying and why they're buying it and who they're getting it in front of and all of those pieces.
Yeah, no, and also, every sponsor is always going to have very different needs and very different motivations as to why they enter into something. And I think it's just being smarter in terms of being able to, A, service them, but also in terms of what we're offering. It shouldn't ever be a kind of, here you go, here's your IKEA product, now go and build it.
Yeah, and so, how does that process work for you and your team? Because, there's hey, we've got all these things, which one do you want to be part of? And then there's the more collaborative approach of sitting down with a Heineken or whoever and saying, what do you want to get out of our relationship? And then starting to come to a point to go, okay, now we know. Do you then go back to your digital and communications and your content team and say, this is the brief, this is what they want, and it's then a collaborative process rather than, we've come up with this great piece of content, you can be on that? Yeah,
it's a bit of both, to be honest. It's and that's partly because we've got so much growth.
Yeah,
it needs to be an ongoing, open conversation. But sometimes we've got so this weekend actually Emirates have, with all their sports properties, talking about helmets, have done a piece about under the helmet.
Yep.
So had Eddie Maguire under the helmet, and throughout the whole season they'll be doing a sort of, who is it? Kind of thing. I don't know if you saw last year, Lewis Hamilton was playing golf with Steph Curry.
Yep.
And he had Steph under a helmet, and that kind of similar thing. Emirates alone have Collingwood and Arsenal and Real Madrid, so the kind of people we could start to get under there would be great. And that was actually, I think that was an idea that was done together. They want to look at doing some good content, and they had obviously a lot of good assets. But equally, sometimes it might be DHL have fastest lap and fastest pit stop.
Yep.
And they've worked with our production team to actually work out how they can edit that in a different way. We're doing a voiceover commentary, looking at the different graphics, the way we can put that together. So that's a right they have that we're just servicing a little bit differently this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You will have ones that people go, I love that piece of content that fits with our brand. Cool, we want to be part of it, and it is a bit of a slam dunk, because you're going to have all this inventory. But then that other piece where you can further integrate, with a partner like Emirates and service them, and it might be that it ends up being great content for their channels.
Exactly.
That and you're sort of we're in the branded content business for them, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on their channels, on the F1 channels, because, they've got, content needs on their channels as well. So it's a bit of a mix of both.
Yeah, no, exactly that.
The other one is, I go back to my... So, explain how... You sort of explained it before around the race organisers and how they're effectively running the race. How is the relationship between F1 and the race organisers on, whether it be direction or collaboration on saying, oh, this is what we're trying to do as an overall theme for the year? How does that relationship work?
Again, it's actually not too dissimilar to the major events.
Yep.
Just obviously there's a bit more miles and mileage to actually get to each of the venues. So we have, just as we did at the World Cup, where you have your venue organisers and then you have your city councils or whatnot. It's just about working with them and sharing the assets that we've got, sharing what the sort of 10-month marketing strategy is when we're rolling stuff out from digital, the new assets. So I think you're seeing there was a bit of the new brand was in Melbourne, but that will obviously start to increase because of the back time to produce some of this. So again, it's very open and just taking them through the new direction that we're going in. I think the promoters, much like the sponsors, it's just bringing everyone together, and also just finding out from them what works. And I think if you have a blank canvas, don't have a totally blank canvas, but the mindset is sort of, if you have a blank canvas, what is it that you'd be looking to do?
But you're all partners with a shared goal of, we want to grow F1. Mm-hmm. It's all about getting more eyeballs or getting more people to the track. Mm-hmm. It's developing new fans, which is things like the hero content and stuff like that. The fan zones to bring more kids into the sport, to say, hey, this is I ran into a friend of mine, and he was there with his son and a mate, and they were I think 8 or 9 years old, and they're coming every year because of all of the activations around, but to see the cars. And so if you're not as an overall strategy for F1, you go, we need to keep developing and making sure this next generation is engaged.
Yeah.
your organisers are a big part of that because it's the physical touch point. As much as digital is great,
yes,
sometimes it's
with
that
all,
photo.
With all sport, it's actually not until you maybe have the ball in your hand or the jersey on your back kind of thing that you actually have that next level of engagement. And I think to go back to your earlier question, sort of when I started last year, one of the big things that amazed me actually is, so I'd been to the Oz Grand Prix previously, but going to some of the other races, and I took a friend to Abu Dhabi, and she just said to me, I've got no idea. I didn't realise there was all this other stuff going on. It's basically like Glastonbury with racing in the middle. And I think that's probably the thing that we need to find, that bridge between the people that engage with content, whether it's watching the race on TV or playing the game or digital, and actually those then go to the event, because it is just nuts. And it is, Sean and Chase have said about having 21 Super Bowls rolling into town around the year. It is a little bit like that. And actually, until you go, you don't realise how much other stuff there is. I mean, in many regards, sometimes you can be in danger of not seeing the race because there's so much stuff going on around the track, and whether it's music or food or the cars they had in Albert Park over the weekend, which is brilliant. Yeah,
pretty much had the same conversation with Dave and Pete at the VRC talking about the Melbourne Cup, and, there is a segment of your market that are like, hey, I go to the event for the event. And, the cars are secondary, but then you can potentially lock them in and they go, oh, well, I'm now going to follow Vettel, or I am now going to, I'm going to follow Dan Ricciardo on other races. And so it starts drawing them in because, you don't have the opportunity that other sports do of, getting a ball in your hand, or, getting a basketball or a cricket bat or something in your hand. Because, yes, obviously you can get into the go-karting and the motorsport sort of grassroots thing, but it's getting into being a consumer of the sport.
Although, interestingly, I think that's where esports comes in for F1. So we've all seen the growth of esports over the last sort of 12 to 24 months. And I think the point of difference for us, maybe the NBA 2Ks and the Maddens of the world, is... the end goal dream would be, could you imagine having your gamer during a live race and through the AI technology being able to actually race Lewis? Like that kind of thing.
But we're not that far away from that.
I say, the end goal dream. It's not like Minority Report, is it?
No, we're not that far away now. Well, I mean, the fact that, you could put Lewis in a simulator and have someone else there. I was talking to the guys at CAMS. They had an activation, and they've got simulators, and they're going to start, having races around Australia and try to figure it. And you don't know whether that will be both, a driver development task, someone that is very good at that, and then can it be translated? But it does help you connect in the same way that people playing FIFA or
and I
NBA
think,
2K.
And that's the biggest thing for esports, is its entry for any sport, is the entry point that it offers for people. I've got a number of, particularly in the States, friends that got into football because of FIFA. And actually their knowledge of other clubs is phenomenal because of FIFA. They'll know who the players are before they move into clubs, and I've got no idea. Kind of have to pretend you do, because, for a bit of credibility.
But the thing with, and the correlation is there, because, talking to the guys at MLS, all the studies say when you play as the team, you become more aligned with the team, and you become more enamoured, and get a deeper engagement, to the point where they're doing goal celebrations in stadium. They're doing the FIFA version, not the live screen, to sort of help make the connection for fans in stadium to go, oh wow, oh yeah, I've seen that on the game. So that is another fan development, I guess, path for F1, and it's like, well, how do you integrate it? And there was a bunch of activations at the track that had gaming.
Yeah, and I just think sort of esports. My director sort of references often that he's got 2 sons, and getting them to sit down and watch maybe a 3-hour race doesn't happen that often, but through the clips they might see on social and actually through gaming, they're much more close to the sport, and they still have an affinity to it, even though they might not be watching the whole race. So I think we'll see a lot coming out of esports and the growth that we've got. I mean, we trialled it for the first time last year with the esports series, and it was a huge success. I think in the UK, Sky Sports, it was the biggest figures that they had for the semi-finals that we hosted. And the production values of it, I mean, were just unreal. We had a spare garage in Abu Dhabi and had the 20 gamers lined up in there, and you could kind of see them sort of on the simulators while all the cars are flying back in the background during practice, and their faces was just, it's just priceless.
That's true. You are presenting a keynote at Sports Accord in April in Bangkok. This podcast might go up before or after it, but the title is The Future of Sports, Future of Sponsorship and Marketing, Perspective is Everything. First of all, have you finished your slides yet? Or is it still a work in progress?
There's a bit of that to do on the flight back to London.
Okay, so you give us some broad strokes of what you want to discuss and when you do develop those slides.
I think we've touched on it quite a lot. It's about having, I think, sort of integrity and honesty and sincerity are sort of values in sport, not just on the field.
Yep.
I mean, it's quite topical this weekend, obviously, but I think it's just about finding new ways and new discussions with sponsors and also with marketeers as to how we're promoting sports.
Yep.
Because there's so much information available now to fans that the fans see through anything that's not true.
Yep.
So I think that's one thing. And then also just as, you touched on the sort of digital expansion that we're going through at F1, there's just so much new content coming up as well. I mean, I saw yesterday the NBA have found a way to sell just the fourth quarter of a game.
Yeah, so they're going into the micro, like the atomization of content to say, hey, $1.99 or 99 cents, watch the last quarter.
Which is just genius.
Yep.
And the way that they've also been sort of doing the kind of letting you know on social that it might be going to overtime.
Yeah,
or
they're sort of effectively going into that NFL red zone package that is, hey, this team's about to score, jump on. And I'm sure a lot of other sports are going to be sitting there watching and going, what's the appetite going to be?
Yeah.
Like, is it going to train people to only watch the last quarter? Does that mean people are just going to buy the last quarter and not buy a full pass? Like it's not done without, some risk.
No.
But the idea is, well, potentially if you start getting those people in, and I think the NBA's done a good job of sharing enough highlights to drive up the interest. I think this is a nice low friction, app, whether it's in an in-app purchase or which it will be, makes it easy for you to get the content. And then it's like, it all comes into the upsell. Like, oh, congratulations, you've watched 5 or 10 fourth quarters. You've actually qualified for League Pass.
Yeah.
And boom, you're starting to lock them in. So
yeah, and I think there just doesn't seem to be an end point. I think in sport, there's just content. There's always something new coming out and to look at and to move, and so I think it's just exciting being part of seeing all that kind of new direction that we're going in with different sports. But it's also, we're competing with not just sport now, we're competing with film and music and
everything being on demand.
Yeah. And so I think equally there's a danger of being everything to nobody.
Yep.
And that's sort of where you have to kind of be sensible and work out what is going to work for us. And you know what, for some sports they might be brave enough to say esports isn't our thing. Let's focus on, it might be getting kids to play the sport. So I think it's cherry picking and working out what's right for you. And then also realising we don't all need to own the world.
Yeah.
There are going to be some markets that you're just never going to tap into. But
and I think that's important, like especially you've got your die-hard, rusted-on F1 fans that consume everything. In a digital sense, I call them your digital cheer squad. So you don't want to neglect them because you're chasing the shiny, hey, there's new fans out there, or this demographic, we need to figure out how to get millennials, right? Because that's where the money has been forever and a day. So you want to make sure they're happy, they're getting it how they want it. Mm-hmm. And if they still want it on their broadcast or on their cable, that's how they want it. But now they're like, oh, OTT makes it more, it makes it easier for me to connect. And then it's like, what products fit for this other segment, which is sort of what the NBA is doing with the, $1.99 or whatever it is for a quarter, or it might be, it's this race. Oh, because you're in this region, you can access to this race for X. Yeah,
and I think the biggest thing sport will always have in our sort of new box set culture is that most of the time it needs to be consumed live.
Yeah.
Particularly the big events. You can't get away from, back in the day, yes, maybe I recorded the FA Cup final and I'd watch it later or whatever, but nowadays you just can't do that. And I think that's its strength pretty much. And that's what people want to buy into. We have this culture where people want to, everyone remembers where they were when,
Well, it's one of the few things that actually you do tune in live for now.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have to tune in live. There's only probably 1 or 2 TV shows like Game of Thrones that
you don't want any spoilers, so then you do watch it live. Yeah,
yeah, you have to watch it live. Whereas everything else is on demand. I'll binge mode that.
Yeah,
I'll just watch that in a big chunk. But
The stories around sport will be undermined, and we're seeing it with Man City and Juve, and obviously now we've moved on to Netflix. But I just think the live point, and hey, I was about to say I'm the biggest sports geek, but that would seem,
You're more than welcome.
I can't say that.
I'm very welcome in the Church of Sports Geek. I'm allowed to have multiple people, but that's the thing. Yeah, everyone, all sports are trying to go to that. 365 days. Hey, we've got content. Yes, you've got your premium, events. Effectively your Super Bowls all the way through the year. But it's like, what content can we push through in between that keeps people engaged without forcing it? Like, and I think the NBA does it well with its summer trade period, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The NFL, has all these little keystone markers that says, they're coming back. MLB, when their training camp starts and all the content and the activity around spring kicks in, I think all the sports are trying to do it, and it's a matter of getting that piece right. So you're not just forcing it to say, we've got to do it for 12 months of the year, because if you're just doing it because you're trying to put content out, it's not going to work. You've got to make sure it's working for whatever fan base you're working with at that time.
No, couldn't agree more.
So I wanted to finish off with the closing five. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
I do. It was Arsenal Man U at Highbury. I wasn't a big David Platt fan, but he scored the winning goal in a 3-2 win, and I had my full Arsenal shell suit on. With matching necklace.
Yep.
I was very trendy as a child. That was my first one.
Have we got photos of that? Can we share that on your socials?
I do actually have a terrible photo of myself and Martin Keown, which gets a lot of laughs. But I think I'll keep that private.
Yeah, no problems. So you've gone to a lot of major events over the journey. Com Games and Rugby World Cup and Cricket World Cup, now F1. Do you have a favourite food memory or a ridiculous food memory?
Favourite food memory probably was I took myself to Atlanta Falcons Seahawks playoff game in 2013.
Okay, where in Atlanta?
In Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Yeah. And I wanted to go and see a playoff game.
Yep.
And I lucked out that my team Seahawks ended up playing there. And I'd met, this is the power of sport, I'd met a guy in a pub in Arsenal, or just outside the Emirates, while I was waiting for friends, and he was going to be at the game, so he said, come and tailgate with my friends, and I'd never been tailgating before.
Tailgating is an awesome experience.
This just massive pulled pork barbecue, and it was kind of, the food was great, but it was also just the whole concept of the tailgating, which just blew my mind. Yeah, no, the tailgating...
I've done the tailgating at both the college games. The
I'd
college
love to do
games
that.
are almost doubly insane. NFL is terrific, but at a college game, and I think the one we did one at Mile High where the Colorado played Colorado State, Denver, and I think we flew in the day before, so my body clock hadn't adjusted, and we were there at 8 o'clock in the morning. And everyone's cracking opening a beer and starting on the spit roast and things like that. Luckily, my body clock was still at midnight, so it was okay. It wasn't so foreign to be drinking beer at 8 o'clock in the morning.
It's the people that go to tailgating that then don't go to the game it's phenomenal. The 50-inch screen on the back of their trucks with the barbecue out.
Yeah, it is amazing. And if you haven't done tailgating, I highly recommend it. What's the first app you open in the morning? Twitter, just catch up on the news, find out what happened.
Yeah, Twitter. Although I would quite like them to sort of get rid of this you might have missed and just go back to the old format of.
I don't mind that you might have missed, because most of the time they've sort of got it right. Like,
that is true.
They're a bit of algorithm. They're like, actually, I did want to know that, so I don't mind the algorithm piece, but. It is useful for it is where news still breaks. It is a good place to catch up. Is there someone that you follow? Or read, or that you recommend that the listeners should be following and checking out?
With my F1 hat on, I should probably say my director, but I will say Murray Barnett.
Okay, yep.
But I also think Kimi Räikkönen is just genius.
In what way?
I don't know if it's a conscious effort to be funny.
Yeah.
But just some of the stuff that he puts up is just brilliant. It's just very Kimmy with his personality. So I think it's refreshing to see him on social.
Yeah, so it's just an athlete that's sharing his mind.
Yeah.
and sharing his personality and letting that shine through a little bit more.
Yeah, and he's fairly new to it this season as well. I don't think he was on last season, so It's just quite good to see. But I think from a non-F1 point of view, I'm a big LeBron fan.
Yep.
And I think he just does social brilliantly. And it's sort of
that
from
whole,
a social cause
point
away as well, not just on the sports side of things. But I think he just uses all of his channels really well and puts up good content.
Yeah, I think what he's doing with Maverick and the Undisputed and all those kind of things, it's all very tactical. He does know what he's doing. He does know when he puts something out that there will be articles upon articles on what he does post.
I just sort of, from a personal point of view, I really respect an athlete that's at the top of his game, but using his position to generate conversations around not just what he does on the court. Because there are not many that, there's quite a few have shied away from doing that, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I think
it's
he
a
does a great
classic
job.
Michael Jordan quote, Republicans buy shoes as well, right? And, the political correctness and, LeBron's an athlete, a digital athlete, and that is living in a time where the platform that he's got, he's realised, and he's known for a long time that it has a lot of power. And the easier thing would have been to do is go, well, my sponsors want me to toe the line and don't want to annoy anybody. And he said, well, no, this is where I stand. And so I agree. I think the way he's both using it and ongoing is, a good example to people. Lastly, what social media platform is your MVP? And so you get to answer this with an F1 hat on and a Zarah hat on.
I think with F1, I think I'm going to put them both the same of Instagram.
Yep.
But then that's probably because I'm not a millennial.
Yep.
So I'm sort of, I think Insta might be moving towards an older platform. But
I think, the growth in Insta for the last 18 months has been phenomenal. And I think, the fact it's got two products, it's got the story and the feed, and
I just think visually, a picture always speaks 1,000 words.
Yep.
So, and I just think the stories that go out, I think at risk of sounding like I'm being biased, I think our F1 social team do a great job of the content they put out. But I think just in general, it's brilliant. The stories, just the images. I'm a big Insta fan.
Yeah, and that has been, I think I've been asking these questions for the last 18 months. It's been, growing, and I guess it's partly you're going where the stats are, and you're seeing the engagement grow and you're seeing the followers grow.
Yeah.
And the followers are growing because people like the content.
Yeah.
And the consumption of the stories and the traffic that it potentially drives. If you say, oh, here's the story of the event, but then you get to also say, oh, here's the story of the packing up. Here's the story of us arriving at the next place.
Yeah.
Which is stuff that hasn't hit many channels. And so it sort of pulls back that curtain a bit. It's a little bit unfiltered.
Yeah, and maybe this is because I'm not young enough, but there's something about making content on Snapchat and then it disappearing that I kind of think, well, I've put a lot of effort into that, and it's not there. Whereas Insta, you can sort of go back and see stuff, and so I'm probably showing a bit more of age there. But
I think there is a bit of a mix. So where can people connect with you?
Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
At ZALKUDCY.
Okay, and obviously you're on LinkedIn. If people look you up and find you, where are you to next? I did ask you how many of the races are you going to go to this year?
I think about 7 or 8. So China's the next one, which is very exciting because actually it's our first fan festival as well of the year. So we've got a takeover in Shanghai city centre for about 3 days. Big sort of taste of F1 and trying to take that away or out of the circuit as well so that we can kind of find a middle touch point. So we've got one in Shanghai kicking off the year and then another 3 later on.
Terrific. Well, safe travels and thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you.
Download our Facebook campaigns guide at sportsgeekhq.com/FB campaigns.
Thanks again to Zarah. You can send her a tweet. Tell her that you listened to this episode. You can do that by going to Twitter at Z or Z if you're in Australia, ALKUDCY. As always, the links to Zarah's Twitter handle, our Instagram handle, which shares a lot of the content from around race day, and also LinkedIn, will be in these show notes. This is episode 193, so it'll be sportsgeekhq.com/193. So that's it for me. Next week, if you have not if you're in Queensland, especially if you're in Mackay, Friday, I will be, this coming Friday, I will be in Mackay. I have no idea how ticket sales are going and that kind of thing, but I thought I'd tell people. So if you're in Mackay, May 4, I'll be in Mackay. May 17, I'll be in Brisbane. And the 31st of May, I'll be in Cairns, talking about data and how sports teams and grassroots clubs can use data to make better marketing campaigns and better decisions. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Queensland 2018 to get all the details and potentially sign up and attend. And if you can't attend and you're in the area, please let me know, drop me a line. It looks like we'll probably have a catch up with a few of the people that are in the Sports Biz Slack. So please reach out. Just a bit of an idea of some of the stuff that we have been doing recently. One of the things that we do probably on every about 6 months is content reviews. So working through with your head of content or your editors, and the more of the content team, the better. Sort of talking to them about the different types of content they're putting out, why they're putting it out, who and what audience it's working for. And then it normally goes hand in hand with sort of the platform reviews. So looking at how Facebook's working, has recent changes made numbers change, the analytics dropping, are the video views falling, have those kind of things. So sort of hand in hand, content and platform reviews. Normally what comes out of the content reviews is a little bit better understanding from the digital team and the content team, understanding of what the audiences that are really hitting the mark, but then also how they might pitch those pieces of content back to the commercial team. Because normally what happens throughout the year is there might be one or two things that sort of happen content-wise on the fly, which is what you want. You want to be able to report and give out content as it's needed. But if it becomes a content series, and it can be named, so it becomes a content strand, is what we would call it. If it can be named and defined with a defined audience, then the opportunity then is to bring in a partner. So, the content reviews and platform reviews are something that we do, as I said, with our regular clients on a 6-monthly basis, or we just sort of come in and do it as required. As if someone says, hey, we want to look over what we're doing from a content point of view and how are we maximising the platforms that we're using. It's something that we do quite regularly. As always, you can simply send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com, if you have a question about the podcast or how we might be able to help you. If you want to book a call, just go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call. And until next episode, as always, you can get in touch on social media at Sean Callanan or via email or via the Sports Biz Slack. I become very available. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join over 1,000 sports business executives in Sports Biz Slack. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Slack. Please share your fave episodes of Sports Geek on LinkedIn. Be sure to tag Sean Callanan.
Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.
Want to chat with Sean? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.